Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Podcasting to you from my field here in beautiful rural Ireland and live on Discord, if you don't mind. I'm Trev Downey and this is Newsround from Anfield Index Pro, and I'm joined by Dan Kennett and Phil Barter to discuss the changes that are about to occur at the club. Some of them as yet theoretical, some of them outlined specifically today, namely that our sporting director Julian Ward, new to the role, will be leaving at the end of the season, as will our director of research Ian Graham, plus sundry other rumours of departures. So we have to ask ourselves a simple question. We're going to drive our general bus in this direction today. What exactly is happening here and why? We'll try to get to the bottom of it with our two eminent guests here. And I want to start off, if you don't mind, Dan, getting the ball rolling for us by trying to outline what it is that a sporting director does and a director of research does, because they are the two that we know for sure are underway. Like I said, further rumours, and there seems to be very, very substantial heft behind the rumours of further departures. But let's not just throw all the toys out of the pram just yet, or run around with our hair on fire. And let's see if we can analyse plug the gaps we can plug. So okay. What is a sporting director, and what is a director of research?
Yeah, it's a bit of a sad day for me and Phil. I think this Trev has definitely got end of an era feel, I'm afraid.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, so director of football, sporting director, is they are the person who sits alongside the manager and basically looks into after all aspects of the club that are not directly to do on pitch related. So all the physios, all the medical, all the data, all the scouting, all goes up to the director of football. He is their line manager. So the head of medical, if you like, Trev, the head of scouting, the head of data, which is Ian Graham, will report into Julian Ward, and he did report into Michael Edwards. So he's their line manager, in addition, he's got responsibility for player contracts. So right. Who gets a contract, who doesn't get a contract? That's also a director of football. Responsibility is the word I'm looking for and failing. But the director of research is specifically the head of the data and analytics department. And so he doesn't get involved so much at all. He won't be involved in anything to do with physio or medical like Julian Ward would be overseeing. He's purely focused on making sure we've got the best data and analytics that we can possibly have as an organisation. And he will hire people within his department. So Ian Graham hired all our PhD level nerds. I always call them nerds because it's a term of affection, really. I'm a nerd.
Of course, yes, yeah. Yes.
But I mean, these guys are elite of the elite nerds. I mean, the director of research himself, Ian Graham, he's a rocket scientist. And Will Spearman, he's an astrophysicist, and he was involved in the CERN project for discovering the Higgs boson particle. So and we've got other really, really, really advanced people as well in our organisation. But Ian Graham would hire those people and get them to come to Liverpool.
Phil, to follow on from what Dan is saying, and it's much appreciated outline there, because like I say, there's a spectrum of knowledge and understanding around these roles and these people. I mean, which goes, Phil, from Michael Edwards, isn't he the laptop guy, to knowing exactly what it is that Michael Edwards did, chapter and verse, and on what day. So we do have a broad sort of scope in our audience here, and we just have to acknowledge that. Just to sort of dial in a little bit further into it, Dan suggested it's a bit of a sad day. And I guess you're looking at the dismantling, and maybe, I don't think that's too strong a word, of something that right. It's been a pretty central cog in this machine. Talk to me just in general about what you feel about the departure of these two. What was you thought that they brought? Because a lot of people weren't even really aware of Julian Ward, despite his extensive involvement in everything Edwards did. And certainly, I know a huge amount of fans will not have heard of Ian Graham. We heard Dan outline his basic resume there. Talk to me a little bit about what it means for these guys to be leaving in terms of the impact you think it might have.
So, I don't think it's too strong a phrase that on UP, we and me and Dan particularly have spoken about. Without these guys, I do not believe we would have won the title and won everything in the game. But they fundamentally changed the way the club was operating from a coach-orientated perspective, i.e. you recruit, your tactics, the way you play is all dependent on the head coach, to a model in which everything was data and evidence informed. And what that meant was that we analysed, Ian Graham's role in this was absolutely key, because if you're going to look at how games are played and the data that you can gain from a game, not just what you see on F-Brief, but there are far many more streams of data that you can gain from a game. If you're going to start looking at that level to understand what works, and if you move a little bit over here, does it affect this bit over here, and how can we gain an advantage that way? You're talking about a level of personnel that has got multiple PhDs and can understand where it all comes and looks at it like the Matrix, if you like, Trev. Yeah, looks at a game like we would see it with pictures. They would see it like the Matrix.
Yeah.
So, and with having those guys in place, they developed an understanding of the game, and they knew exactly where the weaknesses were on every single opponent in the Premiership, and then designed the way in which we could tactically use what we have, our strengths, to take advantage of those weaknesses while also hiding the weaknesses that we had. And then that fed into Edwards' position, and they went and recruited guys over an 18-month period to maximise that model of performance that the data guys that Ian Graham was looking after produced. So if you look at it from that element, coaches are obviously a key cog, because they have to design the tactics to match the weaknesses. Yeah, if you're told that these particular areas of the pitch are the weakness for the opposition, the coaches have to go out and design and get the pattern of play to make sure the players understand that, and put the data into terms that the players understand so they can perform on a match day. But the key thing is here, they established those patterns. They understood what was needed to gain an advantage over an oil state. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they put us at the top of the game. And it became a holistic package. I think the big thing that me and Dan have always been chatting about is with Edwards being the kingpin, we operated in a very data-driven, evidence-based, holistic manner, and every single cog had a merit and understanding, and it meant we got elite performance out of a club that, let's be honest, really shouldn't have been able to compete with an oil state.
Yeah, I'm listening to that, man, and it makes me feel the kind of sadness that Dan was alluding to earlier on. And, I suppose, can we just drill into it another bit, just because there was a real sort of eyebrow-raising moment for me as I was reading through a couple of bits and pieces there, that links that Dan had sent me, fair play to him, in terms of the qualifications of these guys. And I think I'm kind of on top of being into what Liverpool is as a club and what we stand for and knowledge around it. But, you're talking here, it's not too big of an exaggeration to say that these guys are outrageously sought after professionals in areas of expertise which are, beyond the ken of most of us. You start talking to people about the Hadron Collider and the God particle, and their eyes glaze over, and they just it's a magic. It's some sort of magic, some sort of alchemy which is beyond them, and yet we all just have this innate awareness that it means you must be dead clever. So if we are losing people of this standing, and we know there's another name that's been thrown around there in one of those articles, Will Spearman, Dan mentioned it earlier on. So Phil, just to drill into it a little bit with you, is it possible to just shift a set of people like that out and another in?
I mean, those who've been in Discord would have seen the chat. I think me and Dan have been in there in and out most of the day chatting about it. I mean, so you've got different echelons of this. I'm sure you can appreciate, Trevor, there's a range of abilities even within the elite, right?
Yeah.
These guys are that elite that they can transfer their knowledge from a exclusively specific area of the God particle, and then apply those skills to a completely different field in sport, and football. So that tells you how good they are, because there will be people that are expertise in the God particle, but they wouldn't be able to move to another field and apply their knowledge, right? So these are like elite of the elite, but just to give an understanding there. Can you get elite people? Yes, you can, right? But two things that elite people, that drives elite people, it's not money orientated. None of this will be money orientated to get this caliber of people. It's about the vision and the acknowledgement of their knowledge and the...
Are you that person who has everything? The coolest merch and those must-have fan threads? Well, over at our Anfield Index shop, we've gone that extra mile when it comes to pimping up your Liverpool collection. From our popular range of bespoke design t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies and hats, to our signature edition mugs, prints and coasters, all provided with fast worldwide shipping. We have something for every red. We also stock official LFC merchandise and are licensed with the Premier League and UEFA to sell official iron-on shirt badges and sleeve patches. As a listener to this podcast, you can get 10% off everything with coupon code AI Pro 10. Just head over to AnfieldIndex.shop or find us on Etsy by searching for Anfield Index.
If you want the understanding that they are valued, they need to buy into something, and they need to believe that what they are doing has meaningful and purpose. Their whole soul life in training in terms of academia, and I speak from partly myself as well, is to create knowledge and improve the community and world that they live in. All right. So if that is cut off by the fact that their views and their knowledge creation is ignored, then they will not buy into that project.
Yeah.
And that is the problem you have when you are trying to recruit people at that level now with these stories coming out, I feel, is how are you going to get people to buy into something when quite clearly we have a change of direction?
And again, Dan, I'm always wary about being inside baseball, especially when I'm talking to two guys like you who are so drilled into a certain aspect. I want to keep it focused on a wider audience. So what Phil's saying there is talking about how these people feel in terms of taking a role like this and the idea of being valued. And he's nodded at a thing that we need to address here. Because if Michael Edwards, Julian Ward, Ian Graham, and now we're hearing Will Spearman, all men of high standing in different areas and much sought after professionals, if they are all leaving, that's a pattern, and you will appreciate this as a fellow who likes to look at patterns, that we can't ignore, right? So we can't ignore.
Exactly. No, you can't. You have to ask why. Yeah, you do.
So can we start to speculate on that?
Yeah, I mean, just one thing I wanted to add to what you said. The question you asked Phil was, yes, we can get more nerds. Yes, we can get replacement nerds. We might even be able to attract the same quality of nerds. However, if those nerds feel like when they arrive that they are not being listened to and their recommendations are being ignored, they aren't going to stay in post for very long. Yep. So that is the primary concern for me, is that we have an approach that has fundamentally shifted, which means that these people are no longer being as listened to as they once were, and therefore they don't feel valued, and they almost feel redundant. And there is another club which has got elite nerds and doesn't listen to them, and that's Barcelona. So they have between, say, 2016 and 2020, you could argue that Liverpool's analytics and research was the best in the world in football. There might be a few clubs who might even get in the same ballpark as us. And believe it or not, one of them was Barcelona. Some of the work that their people did employed on the Barcelona payroll. The problem is, Trev, is that they were completely ignored. They just worked in an ivory tower because no one in the football operational department listened to a blind word they said.
Yeah. Now, I need to pull this apart as well, because again, this is kind of going to be the first time a lot of people are hearing this in terms of where you appear to be driving the bus and Phil put the key in the ignition, is that they're not being listened to. This is now accepted wisdom all over my timeline on Twitter, and it seems to be what's being spoken about here live in the chat. So where are we getting that concept from? Is there feedback from some of these guys saying that is in fact the case, or where are we putting this together, or is it speculation that's sort of based on X plus Y equals Z?
Well, okay, so I think the starting point you have to go back to is Michael Edwards' resignation, which was November 2020, yeah?
Yeah.
Now, you can take it at face value. He wrote a very, very nice letter which went onto the club website about his reasons for leaving, and it was typically, like an open letter would be, and it was a very good one. Now, you can take that two ways. One, you can take it completely at face value and say he just wanted to spend more time with his family, and 10 years was enough, and yada yada yada. Or you can deduce that there were other things which contributed to that, and which maybe he didn't mention directly in his didn't mention at all in his resignation letter, but he chose to ignore them because he was being a politician and he was being nice.
Yeah.
And you can look at events which probably started around, I'd say, summer 2020, which start to then look at a pattern of events. Now, the first one I recall was the news that we wanted to sign Thiago Alcantara, right? Now, don't get me wrong, right? Thiago Alcantara is a brilliant player, right? However, I am absolutely convinced to this day he was not a Michael Edwards signing, right? He was not a Michael Edwards target. And if you remember at the time, the thing that first pricked my ears with this when I heard it was all the links from like the beat reporters like Paul Joyce were Klopp wants to sign Thiago, Klopp wants Thiago, Klopp wants to sign. It was adamant. It was Klopp wants this, that, and the other. And that was the first time I'd really heard that, in terms of Liverpool. And then the other ones after that were the awardings of some of the player contracts, which may be particularly controversial. I don't think there's any. The other noise that was Jurgen clearly wanted Gini Wijnaldum to stay. He clearly wanted him to get a contract extension, and he didn't get one. Michael Edwards didn't give him that contract extension. But in the case of Jordan Henderson, it was the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Edwards wasn't going to give him an extension. He made lots of noise in the press, and then Jurgen, quite blatantly, I thought, said at a press conference, it will get sorted. And I was thinking, that was another thing then, when this was probably September 2020, and that also pricked my ears because, hang on, he's the manager. He doesn't decide contracts at this club, but now he said this will get sorted. So he's clearly he's overruled the director of football. So maybe Jurgen's gone to Mike Gordon. This is hypothesizing. He's gone to Mike Gordon, and then he said, yeah, we'll get that done. And there you go. So if you are being overruled in your job, do you really want to stay in that job? So that's my hypothesis. You can put two and two together and make five, Trev. I mean, you're the neutral here. It's up to you to decide.
Yes,
but
yeah.
I think you can look at events and then you can make them fit the timeline that we're talking about.
For the record, I'm harrowingly unneutral on this, but we'll pretend I am as we move forward in some sort of nod to professionalism on my part. And Phil, can we just again allow you a chance to have a go at this one? Because I'm not liking what the picture that's building here, which is of a burgeoning dictatorial Jurgen Klopp, who is wielding greater and greater authority to less and less effect. And that's going to be the simple cartoonish depiction of it. It is.
For sure.
So obviously, with everything, there will be shades of grey within there. But is there some merit to that, do you think?
I think there is. For record, I do agree with Dan's timeline. I think there are some key events that you can now piece into place. Key contracts that were given and some that are not. I'm not quite suggesting we've gone back to the Rodgers dual parallel recruitment process, but at times the contract renewals seem to follow a similar kind of path that we're in. But no, I think there is an element that Klopp's new contract changed the game a little bit. There was rumours he'd got more control over certain elements, I think was the bit in the press. And at the time we were like, yeah, that's fine. Jurgen's won us the league, that's fine. And I'm not disparaging to it. I still think Jurgen's a brilliant coach and everything. But there is also a thing in sport that you don't stay in a job that long. And you don't change. There are things, if you look at Ferguson, as much as we berate him for being United manager for many, many years, he changed people underneath to keep things fresh, because otherwise you'd end up changing yourself. But there is a thing about the voice changing. But that also assumes that fundamentally the recruitment patterns and the way the club operates stay the same, which it did at United. They kept the same people involved in terms of recruitment. Yeah. So I think there are some worrying signs that have gone on. Edwards might have wanted to move on, but I think often, as I've written in the text, what's not said in a letter is sometimes more important with these key figures moving on. And I know Julian Ward took up the title of director of football, but he seemingly had a slightly different remit than Edwards. And I think you can start looking back at the timeline and seeing how our recruitment patterns changed. We did a couple of shows on UP about how we used the old Ian Graham and Edwards flag system and scoring. And a lot of it was really fun. Some great pods for us, but I don't think at the time we realised that a lot of the recent signings weren't hitting the mark. Weren't hitting as high scores as the previous round, if you get what I mean. So when we signed Fabinho, Alisson, Naby at the time, that kind of window, we did the scores on those, and they all came out absolutely really, really high. And then when we started looking at people like Diaz, Nunes, Thiago, more recent signings, they weren't. And you can kind of look at it in two ways. And I think we did a very good job on the pods. But actually, when you start looking at this timeline of events, I think Dan's right. That Thiago, and then the following kind of period, Hendo gets a contract, which he probably
just to be
shouldn't
clear as well. Just to be clear for Trev, it's not a talent question.
No,
with here, it's more than just talent. And because, as Si always says, talent is nothing without availability.
Yeah.
Because we knew Thiago's
injury history
when we signed him, and we just accepted it anyway. And he's played exactly the same amount. If you'd have made a prediction about how many minutes he would have played, what's available, it would have been exactly what he played the 5 previous years.
Exactly. I think he broke a record last season, didn't he? Played the most minutes he played for years.
Well, that's why said nerds are in situ, right? I mean, that's what it's all about. And I mean, another sort of piece in this ever changing puzzle is Mike Gordon's sort of stepping back away. So what you have effectively is you had this kind of super successful 70s prog rock band, and one by one the lads leave, and we've got these new people coming in.
Who's Yoko Ono in this scenario?
That's Milner. Milner's Yoko Ono. So I mean, maybe if you could just loop people in on the Mike Gordon influence or lack of influence now, and what's there instead.
Yeah, right.
Hello, I'm here to annoy you. I'm here to annoy you into listening to more of me and more of others on EPL Index. We don't just have the Anfield Index stuff. We've got EPL Index as well, which covers the entirety of the Premier League. And we have 3 podcasts and a whole bunch of really good writing on EPLindex.com. The podcasts are my own Two-Footed podcast, which is every day at 4 p.m, Monday through Friday, covering the whole league. We have A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. You know Tadiwa, he does Anfield Index. He presents A Tad Predictable before every Premier League match week. And then Kevin DeVries and his crew on the EPL Roundtable, they're every week after the Premier League match week. So make sure you listen to everything we're doing on EPL Index and follow us there on Twitter at EPL Index. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Now, I am not going to be completely glowing about Mike Gordon, right? Because I think he's got quite a big charge sheet, in my opinion, because, first of all, he didn't resolve the Rodgers versus committee trouble at the time. It was his responsibility, ultimately, and he didn't do it. And then secondly, after we got hammered 6-1 at Stoke, he didn't immediately sack Brendan on that afternoon, right? And he let him, furthermore, he then let him recruit an assistant manager and sign a load of players, including Christian Benteke, in that summer. So those two are both on Gordon, right? But Mike Gordon is essentially FSG's number one guy at Liverpool FC. He's not on the Liverpool payroll. He's on the FSG payroll, but he's installed there. It's something they did at Boston when they took the Red Sox. They put an FSG guy right at the very top, the most senior person. So he's in operational role, but he's not on the Liverpool payroll. So it's quite a weird situation. But yeah, he is very important. But the most important thing for us is that in our when we were smashing it out the park in recruitment, him, Jurgen, and Mike Edwards were a really close-knit team. Every single article that you read about recruitment and about Liverpool at that time says what a successful team they were, those three together.
Yeah.
So that's what Gordon deserves credit for. But yeah, there has been a change. There's been a big change in the dynamic, and it's never until everybody writes their memoirs and it starts leaking out. Trev, I don't think we're going to ever get to decide what it is. What is that? What caused that change of dynamic? Sometimes people do want to move on. Sometimes people work together long enough. They familiarity breeds contempt, doesn't it, Trev? We know this, right?
I guess I fully get that, and an awful lot of people, I saw someone put the comment in the thread there about sentimental FC, and of course, we are very, it's an emotional club with emotional fans, and quite often the discussion around the football is emotional, and that's why it is nice to be able to talk to a couple of chaps who can sort of step sideways from that and look at it from a different perspective. And it strikes me, Phil, and I want to bring you in here because I know you might have to skip off soon. So I just want to get at least one more question in with you.
No worries.
We have a situation here where if this is true and if there is what Dan was referring to as a brain drain, and we have, maybe even more guys hitting the highway, apart altogether from the question of why, which goes back towards speculation, which we're not really in the business of in this particular show here. We want to talk about what we know. So let's talk about what we know, but let's give it a little bit of a speculative spin. It's an existential threat to everything that the current club is. If you have a lot of those building blocks suddenly getting shifted about or just flat out missing for periods of time. Obviously, we're going to have succession. We're going to have, you would imagine, things in place where people can hand over and that type of thing. That's what happens. They're not going to be idiots about it. But at the same time, we've already had a suggestion earlier on that perhaps Julian Ward's role was slightly tweaked with a view to this bigger picture change. From an existential point of view from the club, do you feel a little bit nervous? Because I know I do today.
Yeah, Trev, I do. I think it's the most nervous I've felt in a long, long time. I think, again, we've batted back and forth on UP about where are we at, what's it like, are we becoming less data informed, this kind of thing. But yeah, right now it's a difficult time. We don't know what do we know? We don't know a lot. Okay, that we can look at things, we can look at timeline, you can piece things together. But what we know right now is, I would say, two of the last remaining blocks that we've built our success as a club over have left or are leaving.
Yeah,
you're left now with Jurgen. Succession planning is obviously paramount to sustain success at any company. And let's be frank, we are a company, we are a business. As much as we are a football club, we have sentiment, but FSG treats us as a business. But Ward was the succession plan. Don't forget, I would be really surprised if they've got someone already ready-made for Ward, because he was the succession plan to Edwards.
Of course.
So, and to look at, this goes back to my problem about recruiting. Until you get that message sorted out, where are we going as a club? Get the sales sorted out, that kind of picture. Recruiting the right people, I believe, will be difficult. You can recruit anybody. I mean, I'm not being disparaging. I'll be disparaging to myself, but people who can analyze data and do those kind of things, there are a lot of people around, and there are a lot of very, very good guys, but they chase the coin. and they're not that fussed at the vision, which is not what you want in a project like Liverpool. You need to set a vision long term. You need to work holistically, because if you're chasing the coin, you're not necessarily there for the long haul. You're not also necessarily there to work with others. It creates differences in an environment of motivation. So yes, I am concerned. I think we need the club to sort out where it's going, what it is, and then it can start building the vision behind that. The immediate concern, I would say, with a lot of us is we've got a window opening up with January. And although the guy's here to the end of the season, things could affect that, because instability in a football club, it doesn't bode well with any facet of life, recruitment being one of them.
And that's the massive, massive, massive elephant in the corner, Dan, is that if we don't have a specifically engaged ownership group with a specific vision, which is based over 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, then how in the hell can we enter this window with anything resembling hope, or even the next one, if it's going to be an ongoing and dragged out process? So
yes.
this is where my existential fears crank up to the next level, because it's like, okay, do we have anyone at the wheel? And let me fold in something for you here, just to make it an awkward little question as well. We talk about succession planning there. Myself and Phil were talking about succession planning. Well, one of the big ones, if not the biggest one in many ways, is the idea of who is going to be the one that will seamlessly bring Liverpool into the next era after Jurgen. And of course, all eyes are on a certain Mr. Linders lately, not necessarily in a good way. And that's another rumour mill. And that's another area of wild speculation, but also an area where it seems to be pulling fans apart in terms of what his role in this whole situation is. So look, I'd pull a lot on the table there, Dan, but do what you can with it, man.
Yeah. So, where to start with that? So what's going to happen in January? Yeah, right. So Julian Ward is still here, right? But Julian Ward was here in the summer when Jurgen Klopp spent all summer saying, we don't need a midfielder, we don't need a midfielder, we don't need a midfielder. 4 days before the window closed, he changes his mind. Then we go out and panic loan Artur. Total cost, fee and wages, about 8 million quid. And he'll probably never play, a first team start for us, right? So when you end up in a panic loan situation, that means you've got a broken process. That it should never have come to that situation. And let's remember that the start of this period I talked about, when you can piece together these things, was the Thiago summer, right? That was also the summer where we ended up with a catastrophic injury crisis because we made a choice to not sign a fourth centre-back, right? The budget was there, and it was decided that budget should be spent on Thiago, Diogo Jota, and Kostas Tsimikas, and not replacing Lovren. So the people who are responsible, i.e. Klopp, because the book stops with him, he has final say. Right from the very start of Klopp's first press conference, right, he had final say. Right, the difference was in the early days, Klopp deferred to experts instead of, just say overriding them, because he wanted to sign Julian Brandt and he wanted to sign Mario Götze. We signed Sadio Mane and Mo Salah instead because the experts said, no, we signed these two players.
I don't need a VPN. I've got nothing to hide. This is what I used to tell myself before I hooked up with LibertyShield.com. Not only is my home internet now fully encrypted, but I can now access all the websites I want, whenever I want, and do so from absolutely anywhere. As a Liverpool fan, I love to know I can now watch every match, regardless of whether it's on UK TV or not. My Liberty Shield VPN makes sure nothing is blocked and guarantees me super fast streaming speed throughout that match. You can get connected right now with their software package, which includes a 48-hour no-obligation free trial and instant access to their apps for Apple, Android, Fire TV, PC, Mac, and Android TV. Or go a step further like I have and get one of their pre-configured VPN routers. These small but powerful devices allow you to easily connect every device in your home to VPN, making it the perfect solution for smart TVs, Mag boxes, and games consoles. Visit libertyshield.com today and use coupon code AIVPN25 to get 25% off at checkout.
So the people who sign off, i.e. Klopp and whoever's with him, must have said, yeah, fine, we won't replace Lovren, we'll spend the budget on these other players and we'll go in, and that's our decision. That we're accepting that. And then we have the whole Ben Davies and Kabak situations at the end of January. Again, this is all within this timeline. I think once where the dysfunction and the tensions have arisen. I think last summer it was a big one. So if you don't fix it last summer, what guarantee is it going to be any better this coming winter? I don't think there is one, Trev. Really, my problem with the manager and his assistant being primarily in control of talent identification, right, is the big data concept. Yeah, Trevor. Yeah. I hope the listeners are comfortable with big data. Is that the data will do more whittling down, get a very long list down to a very short list, because you can't possibly know about all these things happening all over the world, and you let the big data and the data scouting do a lot of work for you. Because if you are in charge of talent ID and you are the manager and you're the assistant manager, your pool of who you might recruit suddenly becomes very, very small, and largely becomes limited to players that actually play well against you, or maybe you've caught a match on telly, and that is not a good situation to be in, Trev. It's going back to you've come through the age of enlightenment, and you may be going back to the Dark Ages, in my opinion.
Really is, man. I agree with you completely. It's the opposite of evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, right. Clubs can sign good players. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have data analysts to sign good players, right? It's about the sustained good decision making. I don't think you can't fluke a sustained run of good decisions. That is the kind of thing where you have to have an edge to get that sustained run. And we barely had a dud for 4 years. And I think that's what's not repeatable.
Yeah.
We also kept playing the same way, Dan.
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
Whereas if you go, Dan's right, you can sign elite players, and we know the names that are batted around, and I'm not saying we won't sign those, but they won't necessarily do the exact roles we want, and you might get a bit of misperformance because they've not been signed with a definitive process way of playing in line. When you get big data, you can directly say these attributes here, which happens to be a player, match what we need to do in these areas here, which happens to be the pitch and the way we play. When you don't have that, you're just going on the fact that he's a very good player, he can learn it.
And Phil, to pick apart something, I'm not sure if we actually said this on the mics or not. You can have all the data in the world, and you can have these great people doing this great work, crunching these great numbers and producing these great data sets, which can be applied, as you said earlier on, like a sort of layer, matrix style layer to see the world in a different way, and therefore exploit that information to your advantage. Or you can maybe not listen to that or pay as much attention to it. And is that the fear here, that perhaps there is a sort of a drift, as we said earlier, as myself and Dan were talking about, maybe a step backwards, which would be very disappointing?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's, I mean, you chat up amongst people. It's certainly one of the things that I was most inspired by FSG's approach. People know my background, but I used to go out all the time. You go out socialise with people, and people who wouldn't support Liverpool in sports science would come and chat to you about, it's amazing how well the club's run. You'd hear stories about how they're using data to do A, B, C, D. People, we were admired within the industry, from the outside, within the media, for our approach, our holistic approach, the way we went about doing things. And you sit there proud as a fan. Obviously, you're happy, but equally from a professional, you're like, yeah, that's how a sports club should run. This is how it should run. You should get this in. These guys should work on it. You recruit to that pattern, and you continually sustain your success. And it was working. It really, really was. We were able to punch above our weight in terms of financial and get huge success, and everybody knew their merit. And that's my worry going forward, is now that in our current financial position, because we're not sold yet, we're dealing with what we know at the moment. We can't compete with City. Or if we lose our edge in terms of our ability to recruit to maximise what we can, then you're relying purely on coachability to get it out of you. And I think there's limits to that. I'm not saying Jurgen's a bad coach, but it has to work together to be able to compete with unlimited resources. And that is a big concern of mine moving forward. And I hate to use the word end of a legacy, but this does feel like the end of that time.
Absolutely. And Dan, if we consider it as a sort of a puncture wound, this brain drain, like, how do you stanch this? What sort of thing can we do to apply a dressing here? I mean, is it just simply a matter of trying to replace, or are we looking at a knock-on effect here? That if things sort of go awry in the background of the club, where there are people doing silent work that's not always seen or appreciated, is it very possible then that all of a sudden we have maybe this season pans out in the second half like the first half did, and we're all sort of wincing in disgust, and then perhaps a second season, and then all of a sudden it only takes two of those, as you well know, before all the rumours will start about our best guys and where they're going to go, because all of a sudden the wheels have come off. It doesn't take long for things like this to take hold, and we've seen it's a kind of it's not a tangible thing as such. It's not something I don't think you can measure. But all it takes is for something like that to get out into the media. Reading that Goal article you sent me, they've got the word chaos in the title. So if this is what takes hold...
We're the opposite of chaos. We're stable. We were the stable... With the bleeding edge we were, Trev. We're the opposite.
Yes, exactly. So if something like this begins in the background and takes hold, maybe more, and we've heard word of not just these guys who've been named, who might be heading for the exit door. The knock-on effect then can materialise within the first team and what's happening there, within the atmosphere in the ground, within the media coverage of the club, and so on and so forth. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and nobody wants that. So, I mean, I'm asking you an impossible question here, but what measures do you think do you want to see happening from a personal point of view over the next little while?
Well, the most obvious one is that a sale could be imminent. Personally, I don't think it's likely, but obviously, new owners would be a reset, and they would appoint their own people anyway, right? That could plausibly explain everything. However, I think a lot of this has been brewing anyway, and a lot of these people would leave anyway. The problem is that Jurgen is the big dog. He's the biggest dog, and rightly so for what he's done and his career. But if he is taking more hands-on, as I think it was phrased by Paul Joyce, then he's going to become accountable for that recruitment. And if the recruitment isn't good enough, then that there's nowhere else to hide after that, is there? He becomes the man on the spot, man on the hook for that, because it's him. And if it's Linda's as well, only Jurgen knows how much influence Pep's got. Because certainly nobody else in the public domain is publicly saying that Linda's is involved. This is very much a fan media thing, I think, with the Linda side of things. But if Jurgen is the big dog, and he's more hands on now under the new people, he's going to be held accountable for that, Trev, I think.
I'm going to come back to you to wrap up your thoughts on this in a second. I want to do exactly that with Phil now. I mean, look, it's a huge topic, Phil, and we've touched on so many bloody things here, but there must be some overriding things that are rocking around in your head at the moment. So if you just want to give us a couple of summary ideas.
Yeah, I just I think it's one of those you have to take stock. I am hopeful that we have got a plan in place. I think Dan's right. I'm not entirely convinced the sale is imminent, but I think some of this might be linked to it. It might not be. But John Henry and the guys at FSG are not stupid by any stretch of the imagination. They will not be sitting there panicking. They will have an idea of what they need to do. And the guys are actually here till summer, and they are very professional guys. I know a few of them through some channels, and they are extremely professional. Even to the extent that when I've been in the circles of them, they've not disclosed anything. That they are very, very professional and loyal to the club. So I think we can assume that we will get the maximum out of them until they leave, and we just have to hope that FSG manage that process and do the handover in such a manner that although we are losing brains in the drain, that the knowledge that they have developed, the intellectual property, if you like, that is owned by the club, will be handed over to the next guys when we recruit, and we can try and pick this up. And hopefully there is a reflection from the club to say, right, what's gone on here? Where do we move? And let's move forward together. Because I do think there has been a moment. I would suggest a call happened after the summer transfer window, and a lot of this stuff that we're now hearing during the World Cup when it's quiet time, decisions were made then. And they're just being leaked out now in the media. So I think we are dealing with the tail end of a process that the club have been aware of for a while. And I have to have faith with that. Otherwise, I think I'll be pressing the panic button as we go forward. So, yeah, I've got faith that the guys in charge have got us this far. Have also had wind of this for a long period of time and have started to put things into place to manage it. And that the January transfer window, bearing on previous knowledge, windows are done a window in advance. So therefore, whatever we were going to do in January is probably already set up to do.
Yes, of course.
And therefore, we just have to hope that the sale goes through before the summer and we can all move on.
Well, I think it's reasonable to place hope in professionalism when you're dealing with people who are operating at a high level and have been professional to date. So I don't think that's too out there. It is a positive
Trev,
thing. Yes.
Just want to say one other thing, right? Is that I think if we're honest as well, and me and Phil have been honest about this as well. When you develop, we had a clear competitive advantage, competitive edge, because of the way we got into use football analytics before pretty much anybody else in the sport to the level that we did. Competitive edges don't last forever. They will. Other people catch up. Exactly the same thing happened in baseball with the Red Sox. You know, the whole Moneyball was there. They hired Bill James, and they fully embraced it faster than anybody else, and they got a big competitive advantage, and they won 2 World Series before they bought us. Right? We've done the same thing again here. Right? But edges don't last. Now, this is not to say, Trev, other clubs long before analytics was a thing have had sustained competitive advantages through more traditional methods, such as elite player trading, top quality scouting, and being excellent tacticians, right? But what made us unique was we developed an edge in a new area of the sport, which had never been done before. But now everyone does analytics now, right? Every single level, down to the Ryman Premier League, Trev, they do analytics, and they all use Prozone. Back in the 90s, Prozone was the edge, and it was the edge for Sam Allardyce at Bolton, and it was the edge for Steve McLaren at Derby, and then Man United. And Man United had the most money, and they had the edge of Prozone. It was the ultimate shit show for everybody else, But so in that respect, it will, all things will end. But the question is, do we have enough elsewhere in terms of player trading, in terms of scouting, and in terms of tacticians and systemic approaches? Do we have enough there to compensate for the loss of our analytics edge?
That is the big question, right? And we just so people know who are listening to the podcast later on, Phil had to scoot off there, and he has left us with an interesting idea that, again, building on his optimism, Dan, and we might as well finish with your last thoughts, and we'll start with your response to this. What if this new model that potentially might get built here is actually better? What if it's more akin, as he says here, to what the FIFA fans want, and that we're just going out buying elite players all the time? I mean, is there a new paradigm for us to evolve into, a new mode of existence for Liverpool to embody? There's got to be. That has to be the hope.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, money compensates for a lot of bad decisions. You can get away with a lot more if you've got more money. Yeah. But at the same time, Trev, I'll just raise you Man United and Barcelona. You can have as much money as you want to make a blind bit of difference.
Yeah.
And actually, even closer to home, Everton. You know, they've spent like the third most money in the last 5 years of any team, you know, in Europe and the Premier League, and they're shit. They just literally, they might as well have poured 500 million down the drain for what they've got out of it. Aren't they in the relegation zone? No, still.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, right? That is the problem. And I mean, this is where I empathize immensely with both yourself and Phil on a day like this, because it does feel, to use that image that we've both mentioned now, it does feel like the band's breaking up. Yeah. And it does lead to that bigger existential question of what now? And it's fair to ask that. And you're not being a Cassandra by wondering, you're not a doom merchant by asking the question, what's now? It's a fucking valid question, Dan. So, I mean... Yeah,
it's just depressing. I just don't like it's a backward step in my mind. It's like going, you said, going from the Enlightenment back to the Dark Ages. I don't like it. But, you know, I'm just a nerd. So, you know, lots of people who are into bang into their scouting and their, you know, stuff like that, and will say, you know, analytics was, you know, that's not the be all and end all. If you've got the eye, you know, you've got the eye.
I mean, should we start wrapping it up on that, like, very cautiously optimistic, and yet I don't believe you for a minute note?
The other thing, this is the natural consequence of Brexit, you know, because we all know that the UK is sick of experts, Trev.
Yes, to hell with experts, who needs them?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, as you said, it's potentially turning our backs on something that's absolutely crucial building block of what's been good that we've all enjoyed.
Yeah.
And for that to be perhaps beginning to sort of pull apart is absolutely genuine reason for concern. And hopefully, do you know what I want to do, man? I want to revisit this with you in a week or two when we know a little bit more information. If we see a few more people departing the ship, keep an eye on it.
But alternatively, you know, we get to January and we sign 2 players straight directly from South America who go on to be absolute world beaters in the second half of the season, and we all think, what we all wringing our hands over.
Yes, well, let's hope for that, shall we? Let's hope for that. Right, we will start wrapping it up. I want to thank Phil Barter and Dan Kennett. I've been Trev Downey. This has been Newsround, a sort of impromptu one based on the news today for Anfield Index Pro, and we'll speak to you again very soon.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at anfieldindex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.